In a city that built itself on beer and bricks, one man controlled everything else. And when they finally took him down, they discovered he'd been running an empire they didn't even know existed. May 27, 1918. Milwaukee, Wisconsin. A city of breweries and factories, where German and Polish immigrants built their futures with hard work and honest sweat. But in the Italian neighborhoods on the city's east side, a different economy was taking root. One built on numbers, protection, and the kind of work that happened in shadows. Francesco Joseph Balistrieri was born into this world. His father, Joseph, had immigrated from Sicily and opened a legitimate grocery store, but like many Sicilian immigrants of that era, he understood both sides of the American dream. Young Frankie to the family, grew up watching how respect was earned, how problems were solved, how money flowed through channels the law couldn't track. Milwaukee wasn't New York or Chicago. It was smaller, quieter, less violent. But that didn't mean organized crime didn't exist. It just meant it operated differently. The Milwaukee mob was disciplined, low-key, careful. They didn't make headlines with Tommy gun massacres or public executions. They made money, stayed quiet, and let the breweries get all the attention. Frank was smart, not just street smart but educated. He attended Marquette University Law School, studying to become a lawyer. This wasn't a cover or a hobby. Frank actually earned his law degree, passed the bar, and could have built a legitimate legal career. But he looked at the legitimate world and saw limitations. He looked at the underworld and saw opportunity. By his early 20s, Frank Balistrieri had made his choice. He would use his legal education not to defend the law, but to exploit every loophole, every technicality, every gray area it offered. He would become a lawyer gangster, a businessman criminal, a man who operated in both worlds with equal fluency. And Milwaukee, a city that thought it was too small for a real mob problem, had no idea what was coming. In the 1940s and 50s, Frank Balistrieri worked his way up through Milwaukee's Italian-American underworld. He started as a lawyer representing mobsters, defending them in court, helping them with legal matters, becoming trusted counsel. But Frank wasn't just their lawyer. He was learning the business, building relationships, positioning himself for something bigger. The Milwaukee crime family at that time was run by older Sicilian bosses who operated the traditional rackets: gambling, loan sharking, labor racketeering, some protection schemes. They were making money, but they were also old-fashioned, stuck in the ways of the past. Frank saw opportunities they missed. He understood that the real money in modern America wasn't in street crime, it was in controlling legitimate businesses, in skimming from casinos, in labor union corruption, in infiltrating industries that looked clean but generated massive cash flows. He also understood something the older bosses didn't. The law was a weapon. If you knew how to use it, you could destroy enemies without firing a shot, could protect your operations through legal maneuvers, could make yourself almost untouchable. Frank's law degree wasn't just a credential, it was armor. By the late 1950s, Frank had become underboss of the Milwaukee family, second in command, waiting for his chance. And when the old boss retired in the early 1960s, Frank Balistrieri, at 42 years old, became the official boss of the Milwaukee crime family. The lawyer had become the Godfather. Frank Balistrieri's vision for Milwaukee was different from the violent, flashy operations of New York or Chicago. He wanted a criminal empire that operated like a business, efficient, low-key, highly profitable. And he built exactly that. He controlled gambling operations across Wisconsin, illegal casinos, sports betting, numbers rackets. But Frank's gambling operations weren't run by thugs in back alleys. They were sophisticated, organized, operated through legitimate-looking businesses. Vending machine companies, restaurant supply businesses, entertainment venues, all fronts for gambling operations. He dominated the vending machine and jukebox business in Milwaukee, collecting revenue from every bar, restaurant, and club that wanted his machines. This wasn't just about the money from the machines themselves, it was about having presence in hundreds of locations, about knowing what was happening in every neighborhood, about controlling access to businesses. Frank also controlled strip clubs and adult entertainment venues, businesses that generated enormous cash flows and were difficult for authorities to monitor. These weren't just money makers. They were also places where business could be conducted, where politicians and businessmen could be compromised, where leverage could be created. Labor racketeering was another focus. Frank had influence over several Teamsters locals in Wisconsin, controlled construction unions, had his hands in the hospitality workers union. This gave him power over who worked, who got contracts, who could operate without labor problems. Businesses paid Frank for labor peace, protection from strikes, slowdowns, union disputes. But Frank's masterstroke was his connection to Las Vegas. And that connection would make him rich beyond his wildest dreams, and eventually destroy him. In the 1960s and 70s, Las Vegas casinos were gold mines, generating hundreds of millions in cash. But the real money wasn't in the official revenue, it was in the skim. Before earnings were reported to the government, before taxes were paid, cash was skimmed off the top and distributed to the mob families who secretly controlled the casinos. Frank Balistrieri, through his connections to the Teamsters and his relationships with other mob families, had a piece of the Las Vegas skim. Specifically, he received money skimmed from several casinos, including the Fremont Hotel and Casino and the Stardust. The operation worked like this. Casino employees would skim cash from the counting rooms before it was recorded. This cash was then distributed to mob bosses across the country: Kansas City, Chicago, Cleveland, Milwaukee. Frank's cut from Las Vegas was estimated at hundreds of thousands of dollars annually, maybe millions over the years he was connected to the operation. This money was pure profit, untraceable, untaxed. It flowed into Milwaukee, was laundered through Frank's legitimate businesses, and made him one of the richest men in Wisconsin, though few people knew it. But the Vegas skim had a fatal flaw. It involved too many people, too many families, too many chances for someone to talk. And when the FBI finally penetrated the operation in the late 1970s and early 80s, it would bring down mob families across the country, including Frank Balistrieri's. Frank Balistrieri ran Milwaukee differently than most mob bosses ran their territories. He was disciplined, conservative, careful. He didn't tolerate flashiness, didn't allow unnecessary violence, demanded absolute loyalty and discretion from his men. Frank himself lived well but not ostentatiously. He owned a beautiful home in the affluent suburb of Shorewood, drove nice cars, wore expensive suits. But he didn't flaunt wealth, didn't act like a gangster movie character. To most people in Milwaukee, Frank Balistrieri was a successful lawyer and businessman, nothing more. He was also deeply involved in Milwaukee's Italian-American community. He attended church regularly, supported Italian cultural organizations, was seen at community events. This wasn't just cover. Frank genuinely believed in maintaining connections to his heritage, to the community his family came from. But beneath the respectable surface, Frank was absolutely ruthless when necessary. He ordered beatings, intimidation, and when required, murders. People who crossed Frank Balistrieri, who stole from him, who violated the rules, they learned that the lawyer in the expensive suit was also a mob boss who would destroy anyone who threatened his empire. Frank's style was control through fear and respect, not through constant violence. People obeyed Frank because they knew the consequences of disobedience, because they understood his power, because he had built a reputation over decades that preceded him into every room. Frank Balistrieri ran his mob family like he ran his actual family, with absolute authority. He had 3 sons, Joseph, John, and Peter, and he brought them into the business, trained them, positioned them in key roles throughout his organization. Joseph became his primary lieutenant, handling day-to-day operations, managing the various rackets, serving as Frank's eyes and ears. John was involved in the casino operations and the Vegas connections. Peter handled some of the legitimate businesses and provided legal support using the law education Frank had insisted his sons receive. This was Frank's vision, a family business that would last for generations, where the Balistrieri name would mean power in Milwaukee for decades to come. He believed he was building an empire, a legacy, something that would survive him. But Frank's decision to bring his sons into the life would have devastating consequences. When the federal government finally came after Frank, they didn't just target him, they targeted his entire family. And the empire Frank thought he was building for his sons would instead destroy their lives. In the 1970s, Frank Balistrieri became involved in an unexpected business: pornography. The adult entertainment industry was exploding, and Frank saw an opportunity. His organization began producing and distributing adult films and magazines, using connections in Milwaukee and other cities to build a profitable operation. This wasn't just about the money, though the profits were substantial. Pornography operations gave Frank leverage. He could compromise politicians, businessmen, and law enforcement officials by documenting their involvement with or patronage of adult entertainment. This leverage could be used to gain protection, to influence decisions, to ensure cooperation. But the pornography business also brought problems. It attracted federal attention, particularly from the FBI and IRS, who saw it as a way to penetrate mob operations. It also brought Frank into conflict with other families who had their own porn operations, creating territorial disputes and tension. Frank's involvement in pornography would later be used against him in federal prosecutions. The government painted him not just as a traditional mobster, but as someone involved in the sleazy, degrading world of adult entertainment, a characterization that damaged his carefully cultivated image as a respectable businessman. The Las Vegas skim operation, the gold mine that had made Frank Balistrieri and other bosses rich for years, began to unravel in the late 1970s. The FBI had been investigating casino corruption for years, and they were finally penetrating the operation. Wiretaps captured conversations about the skim. Informants provided details about how money moved from Vegas to various cities. Casino employees facing prosecution began cooperating. The web of silence that had protected the operation for decades was breaking. Frank knew investigations were happening, but he believed his careful methods, his layers of insulation, would protect him. He had operated for decades without serious legal consequences. Why would this be different? But this time was different. The FBI wasn't just investigating Milwaukee, they were investigating the entire network of mob families skimming from Vegas. They had resources, technology, and most importantly, RICO laws that allowed them to prosecute entire criminal enterprises. Frank's careful world was about to collapse. And the empire he had built, the legacy he had planned, would crumble faster than he ever imagined possible. The FBI's investigation into Vegas casino corruption was codenamed Strawman, referring to the practice of using front men, strawmen, to hide mob ownership of casinos. It was one of the largest organized crime investigations in American history, targeting mob families in multiple cities. Milwaukee was one of the primary targets. FBI agents wiretapped Frank's phones, his businesses, his associates. They followed him, photographed his meetings, documented his every move. They interviewed his enemies, pressured his friends, offered deals to his associates. Frank fought back using his legal expertise. He challenged wiretaps, filed motions, used every legal tactic he knew to slow the investigation. But the evidence was overwhelming. The FBI had recordings of Frank discussing the skim, of his sons coordinating with Vegas contacts, of the Milwaukee family's involvement in casino corruption. In 1983, federal prosecutors brought charges against Frank Balistrieri, his 3 sons, and other members of his organization. The charges included racketeering, conspiracy, extortion, and interstate gambling violations. It was a massive indictment, the culmination of years of investigation. Frank, who had spent his entire career avoiding serious legal trouble, was now facing decades in prison. And his sons, the legacy he had built, the family business he had created, were facing the same fate. The trial of Frank Balistrieri and his sons was a media sensation in Milwaukee. The city had always known organized crime existed, but seeing their supposed Godfather on trial, hearing evidence of Vegas skimming, pornography operations, and labor racketeering, it was shocking. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. They had wiretaps of Frank discussing criminal operations. They had casino employees testifying about the skim. They had financial records showing money flowing from Vegas to Milwaukee. They had cooperating witnesses, former associates who had cut deals to testify against Frank. Frank's defense was that he was a legitimate businessman being persecuted by the government, that the witnesses were liars seeking reduced sentences, that the evidence was circumstantial. He used his legal training to challenge every aspect of the prosecution's case, filing endless motions, objecting to evidence, trying to create reasonable doubt. But the evidence was too strong. In 1984, Frank Balistrieri and his 3 sons were convicted on multiple counts. Frank was sentenced to 13 years in federal prison. His sons received sentences ranging from 8 to 10 years. For Frank, who was 66 years old, 13 years was essentially a life sentence. He would die in prison or die shortly after release. The empire he had built was gone, seized by the government. His sons' lives were destroyed. The Balistrieri name, which he had worked decades to make powerful, was now synonymous with organized crime and disgrace. The Godfather of Milwaukee had fallen, and he had taken his entire family with him. Frank Balistrieri was sent to federal prison in 1984, and for a man who had lived his entire life with power and control, incarceration was torture. He was stripped of everything: his authority, his freedom, his dignity. In prison, Frank was just another inmate, another old man serving time. The younger criminals didn't know who he was or didn't care. The guards treated him like any other prisoner. The respect he had commanded in Milwaukee meant nothing behind bars. Frank's health deteriorated in prison. He suffered from various ailments related to his age and the stress of incarceration. He was eventually transferred to a medical facility, his condition worsening. In 1986, after serving less than 3 years of his 13-year sentence, Frank Balistrieri was released early due to his failing health. He was 68 years old, broken, sick, his empire destroyed, his son still in prison. He returned to Milwaukee to his home in Shorewood, but he was a shell of the man he had been. The community that had once respected him now avoided him. His legitimate businesses were gone, seized by the government. His criminal organization had collapsed without his leadership. Frank spent his final years in relative isolation, his health continuing to decline. The man who had once controlled Milwaukee, who had received Vegas skim money, who had built what he thought was an unbreakable empire, was now just an old man waiting to die. On February 7, 1993, Frank Balistrieri died at St. Mary's Hospital in Milwaukee. He was 74 years old. The official cause of death was heart and kidney failure. His body, worn down by age, stress, and prison, finally gave out. His death was noted in local newspapers but didn't make national news. The Godfather of Milwaukee, who had once been powerful and feared, died quietly with little fanfare. His funeral was small, attended primarily by family. Many of his old associates stayed away, either in prison themselves, cooperating with authorities, or wanting no connection to the Balistrieri name. Frank was buried at Holy Cross Cemetery in Milwaukee, in the city he had controlled for decades. His grave marker is simple, listing his name and dates, nothing to indicate who he had been or what he had built. With Frank's death, the Milwaukee crime family effectively ceased to exist as a significant organization. There was no heir, no successor capable of rebuilding what Frank had created. The empire died with the emperor. Frank Balistrieri's 3 sons served their prison sentences and were released in the early 1990s. But their lives were forever changed by their father's decision to bring them into the life. Joseph, the oldest, tried to rebuild some semblance of a normal life after prison but struggled with the stigma of the Balistrieri name and his criminal record. He died in 2010, never having escaped the shadow of his father's empire. John and Peter similarly tried to move on, but the Balistrieri legacy followed them everywhere. Job opportunities were limited, legitimate businesses were difficult to maintain, and the FBI continued to monitor them for years after their release. None of Frank's sons rebuilt the criminal organization. They didn't try to reclaim their father's empire or return to the life. The prosecution had broken them, shown them the cost of following their father's path. Frank had wanted to build a family business that would last for generations. Instead, he destroyed his family, robbed his sons of normal lives, and left them with nothing but a notorious name and prison records. The Strawman investigation didn't just take down Frank Balistrieri, it exposed the entire Vegas skim operation, revealing how mob families across the country had been stealing millions from casinos for decades. The trials that followed Frank's conviction in Milwaukee targeted mob bosses in Kansas City, Chicago, Cleveland, and other cities. Dozens of mobsters were convicted, sentenced to long prison terms. The old system, where mob families secretly controlled Vegas casinos and skimmed profits, was destroyed. The revelations also led to massive changes in how Las Vegas was regulated. The Nevada Gaming Commission increased oversight, implemented new counting procedures, required more transparency in casino ownership. Mob influence in Vegas, while never completely eliminated, was dramatically reduced. Frank Balistrieri's connection to the Vegas skim, his piece of that massive criminal enterprise, was what ultimately destroyed him. If he had stayed focused on Milwaukee operations, on local rackets, he might have avoided federal prosecution. But the allure of Vegas money, the temptation of those enormous skimming profits, proved irresistible, and it destroyed him. After Frank's conviction and death, organized crime in Milwaukee didn't disappear, it just changed. The structured, family-based operation Frank had built was replaced by smaller, independent crews operating without the discipline and organization Frank had imposed. Some of Frank's former associates tried to maintain operations, gambling, loan sharking, labor racketeering. But without Frank's leadership, his connections, his ability to mediate disputes and maintain order, these operations were shadows of what they had been. The Milwaukee Police Department and FBI continued to monitor organized crime in the city, occasionally making arrests of individuals claiming connection to the old Balistrieri family. But there was no longer a functioning mob family in Milwaukee, no longer a Godfather controlling the city's underworld. Milwaukee, which had once supported a significant mob presence, became like many mid-sized American cities. Organized crime existed but was fragmented, localized, lacking the structure and power of earlier eras. Frank Balistrieri's legacy in Milwaukee wasn't the empire he built, it was the void his removal created. His conviction demonstrated that even mid-sized cities weren't safe havens for mob bosses, that federal law enforcement would pursue organized crime everywhere, not just in New York or Chicago. Frank Balistrieri's legal education was both his greatest advantage and his ultimate failure. His law degree gave him tools other mobsters didn't have: understanding of legal procedures, ability to exploit loopholes, skill at defending himself and his organization. But Frank's legal knowledge also gave him false confidence. He believed he could outmaneuver the law, could use his legal expertise to stay one step ahead of prosecutors. He thought his careful methods, his layers of insulation, his sophisticated operations would protect him. He was wrong. The government's RICO statutes were specifically designed to prosecute people like Frank, smart criminals who insulated themselves from direct criminal activity. His law degree couldn't save him from laws specifically crafted to take down mob bosses. Frank's story is a cautionary tale about the limits of intelligence in criminal enterprises. Being smart, being educated, being careful. These things can extend your career, help you avoid mistakes that destroy other criminals. But they can't make you untouchable. Eventually, if you're committing serious crimes, the law will find a way to reach you. One of Frank Balistrieri's most profitable and longest-running operations was his control of the vending machine and jukebox business in Milwaukee. This seemingly mundane industry was actually a perfect racket for organized crime. Vending machines and jukeboxes generated consistent cash revenue that was difficult for authorities to track. They provided legitimate-looking income that could be used to launder money from illegal operations. They gave Frank's organization presence in hundreds of locations: bars, restaurants, clubs, shops, creating a network of information and influence. But the real power of the vending machine business was in the monopoly. If you owned a bar or restaurant in Milwaukee and wanted vending machines or jukeboxes, you used Frank's company. Trying to use a competitor meant problems, labor issues, accidents, harassment from health inspectors, mysterious fires. Most businesses found it easier to just use Frank's machines and pay his prices. This operation generated millions of dollars for Frank over the decades, required minimal violence to maintain, and provided a perfect front for his criminal empire. It was the kind of racket Frank excelled at: profitable, sustainable, low-key. When Frank was convicted, his vending machine empire was seized by the government and sold off. The monopoly was broken, competition returned, and one of Frank's most reliable revenue streams disappeared. Frank Balistrieri's involvement in strip clubs and adult entertainment venues gave him both profits and power. These businesses generated enormous cash flows, perfect for a mob boss who needed to launder money and hide income. But the strip clubs provided something more valuable than money: they provided leverage. Politicians, businessmen, police officials, they all visited these establishments. And Frank made sure their visits were documented. Photographs, records, evidence of compromising activities, all filed away for future use. This leverage protected Frank's operations for years. When he needed a favor from a politician, when he needed a cop to look the other way, when he needed a business deal approved, he had the tools to ensure cooperation. The strip clubs weren't just businesses, they were intelligence operations. Frank's strip club empire in Milwaukee and surrounding areas was extensive. Multiple clubs, adult bookstores, massage parlors. All of them generated cash, all of them provided opportunities for leverage, all of them were fronts for other operations. When Frank was prosecuted, the government used his involvement in pornography and strip clubs against him, painting him as a sleazy operator in degrading industries. This damaged the respectable businessman image Frank had carefully cultivated and made him less sympathetic to juries and judges. Like many mob bosses, Frank Balistrieri had deep connections to the Teamsters Union. In Wisconsin, Frank had influence over several Teamsters locals, controlled appointments, influenced elections, and used the union to further his interests. The Teamsters connection provided several benefits. First, it gave Frank control over who worked and who didn't, a powerful tool for intimidation and coercion. Second, it provided access to the Teamsters Pension Fund, which could be used for loans to mob-connected businesses. Third, it gave Frank leverage over any business that depended on trucking, warehousing, or transportation. Frank's Teamsters connections also linked him to national mob operations. The Teamsters were controlled or influenced by mob families across the country, and Frank's position in Wisconsin Teamsters leadership made him part of a national network. But the Teamsters connection also brought federal scrutiny. The Department of Justice had been investigating Teamsters corruption for decades, and Frank's involvement made him a target. His Teamsters connections were used against him in the Strawman prosecution, demonstrating his influence over legitimate institutions. Unlike some mob bosses who enthusiastically embraced narcotics trafficking, Frank Balistrieri was cautious about the drug trade. He understood that dealing powder, dope, crystal, or even pot brought severe federal penalties and aggressive prosecution. Frank's organization wasn't completely absent from narcotics. Some of his associates were involved in drug trafficking, but it wasn't a primary focus. Frank preferred traditional rackets that carried less risk: gambling, loan sharking, labor racketeering, legitimate business corruption. This conservative approach kept Frank's organization relatively stable and avoided some of the problems that destroyed other families. Drug cases created informants. Men facing 20 to 30 years in prison would cooperate, testify, destroy entire organizations to reduce their sentences. By limiting drug involvement, Frank reduced this risk. But Frank's caution about narcotics also meant he missed enormous profits. The drug trade in the 1970s and 80s generated billions of dollars, and families that embraced it became extraordinarily wealthy. Frank's conservative approach cost him money, even as it helped him avoid some legal problems. Ultimately, Frank's downfall came not from narcotics but from Vegas skimming. His careful avoidance of drug trafficking couldn't save him from the consequences of his other criminal enterprises. The FBI's investigation of Frank Balistrieri wasn't a quick operation. It was a decade-long effort that required patience, resources, and persistence. FBI agents in Milwaukee had suspected Frank's role for years but lacked evidence for serious prosecution. The breakthrough came from the Vegas investigation. As FBI agents pursued casino skimming, Frank's name kept appearing in wiretaps, financial records, informant testimony. He wasn't the biggest fish in the Vegas skim operation, but he was significant enough to target. The FBI used every tool available: wiretaps on Frank's phones, surveillance of his movements, financial investigations, pressure on his associates to flip. They built the case piece by piece, recording by recording, document by document. Frank fought back using his legal knowledge, but the FBI was patient. They knew that eventually they would have enough evidence. And when they brought charges in 1983, it was an overwhelming case built on years of work. The FBI's takedown of Frank Balistrieri demonstrated that mid-sized city mob bosses weren't safe from federal prosecution, that careful operation couldn't overcome determined investigation, that the era of regional mob bosses operating with impunity was ending. Throughout his career, Frank Balistrieri maintained an elaborate facade as a legitimate businessman. He owned restaurants, invested in real estate, operated the vending machine business, practiced law. To many people in Milwaukee, Frank was a successful Italian-American businessman, nothing more. This facade served multiple purposes. It provided legal income to explain his lifestyle. It gave him legitimate reasons to meet with various people and conduct business. It made him appear respectable, making it harder for law enforcement to paint him as a dangerous criminal. Frank was skilled at maintaining this facade. He never publicly admitted to mob connections, never acknowledged being a boss, never broke character. Even when confronted by FBI agents, even during his trial, Frank maintained that he was just a businessman being persecuted by the government. But the facade couldn't withstand the evidence presented at his trial. The wiretaps, the witness testimony, the financial records, all of it proved that Frank's legitimate businesses were fronts for criminal operations, that the respectable businessman was actually the Godfather of Milwaukee. The collapse of Frank's facade was devastating to his image and his legacy. He couldn't maintain the illusion that had protected him for decades. The truth was exposed, and Frank Balistrieri was revealed as exactly what he was: a mob boss who had successfully hidden in plain sight for years. Frank Balistrieri's greatest failure was that his empire couldn't survive without him. Unlike bosses who built organizations that could function under new leadership, Frank's operation was too dependent on his personal connections, his legal expertise, his relationships with other families. When Frank went to prison, the Milwaukee family collapsed. His sons couldn't maintain it. His remaining associates lacked the skills and connections. The careful structure Frank had built required Frank to operate, and without him, it fell apart. This revealed a fundamental flaw in Frank's approach. He had built a successful criminal empire, but he hadn't built an institution that could survive his removal. Everything depended on him: the Vegas connections, the Teamsters' influence, the political relationships, the ability to mediate disputes and maintain order. When Frank died in 1993, the Milwaukee crime family effectively ceased to exist. No one rebuilt it, no one tried to reclaim Frank's territories. The Balistrieri name, which Frank had worked to make powerful, became instead a cautionary tale about the cost of organized crime. Frank wanted to build a legacy that would last for generations. Instead, he built an empire that died the moment he was removed from power. It was a complete failure of succession planning, a reminder that even the smartest criminals can't escape the fundamental instability of criminal enterprises. Some men build empires that outlast them. Frank Balistrieri built an empire that couldn't survive without him. He was the lawyer who became a godfather, the legitimate businessman who was secretly a mob boss, the careful operator who thought his intelligence would save him from the law's reach. He controlled Milwaukee for decades, got rich from Vegas, brought his sons into a business that destroyed them. And when the FBI finally took him down, they didn't just end his career, they ended an entire era. He was Milwaukee's godfather. And when he fell, he proved that being smart wasn't enough, that being careful wasn't enough, that even the most sophisticated criminal empire is still just a criminal empire waiting to collapse.